Alright, welcome back everyone dito sa latest episode ng Deep Dive. Pwede na natin siguro isingit din ito doon sa Marcos and Marxism series natin with sila Walden, Ronald, and the rest. Yeah, nag-double yan. So today we have with us Professor Nathan Quimpo. Thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us. I know, to be honest, isa ka sa pinakamakulit na Facebook mates ko over the past 2 weeks, sending me all sorts of files. I'm glad that your fantastic, fantastic work, really journal article, long essay version is somehow coming out in one. Pero sabi ko, at the very least, let's also have an audiovisual podcast version because nowadays marami rin sa ating mga kababayan na interesado sa mga ganitong analysis, not only in the written form, but also in this kind of a visualized, conversational, breezy part. Thank you so much again, Professor Kimpo, for joining us.
Okay, yes, okay. Oh yeah, it's nice to join your session. You session. I'm not really used to this podcast thing. Right now, it's I'm in Japan, it's Cuba, and it's snowing outside. Uh, anyway, let's get started.
Absolutely, absolutely. Of course, Professor, I mean, I call you Nathan. We're good friends. Nathan, obviously, your works contested democracy and the left in the Philippines after Marcos, your works on oligarchic patrimonialism, on political parties and corruption. Kasama yan sa mga canons of Philippine political science and social science analysis. Or at the very least, I considered them as part of canons, Nathan. I put at least one of your works dun sa Oxford bibliography of basically key works on Philippine politics. So it's really a pleasure to have you with us today. And obviously, pag-usapan natin maraming bagay, longerie, basically long-term analysis of corruption and all in the Philippines. But can we go to your latest series of writings for folks who didn't manage to catch it or for folks who didn't read it in full? Because as I mentioned a while ago, mahaba actually yun eh. Originally, how long was this? And under what circumstances, Nathan, you felt the urgency to come out with this and to make such a comprehensive and compelling series of
Well,
essays or big
the thing is
essays.
that for the past 2 years, I mean, last year and then earlier this year, I taught a course on corruption in Ateneo. No? I mean, they asked me, I had written some articles before about corruption, and they were looking for somebody to teach the course. And I said, okay, I can do it online. So it was an online course. And that put me in a situation where you sort of go over various cases of corruption in the Philippines. And so, yeah, as you study all these different corruption scandals, scams, and so forth, then you sort of get to see certain patterns, okay? And that's why I decided, well, because nobody had written about these cycles of corruption before, so I thought, oh, it would be perhaps nice to, just come up with a piece for that. Not really for a journal, but something that's more accessible. Yeah, so that's why I wrote that piece for Rappler. And it was quite long, but they asked me to split it into two. Okay, and so
Right.
it became two articles.
But still, very, very long articles. I mean, we were hoping to get whole broadsheets for you, but I mean, you never know. My point is that let's just get as much as we can out of here. In the coming days, we're gonna have hopefully Ronald Llamas, Secretary Llamas, and also Justice Carpio with us to break down itong expectation natin sa basically the Remulla list as we speak. Of course, there's also fake news or speculations about the state of health of Secretary Remulla. I saw that our good friend Ronald, our Cuatro Alas groups at DZMM are also just having an interview, or at least lumabas yung interview nila with Boying Remulla. But Nathan, let's go back a little bit to the theory part. So can you give a kind of an executive summary first of etong argument niyo? Because you talk about the short and the long cycles of corruption. Let me bring out first the short cycle of corruption. Okay.
Well, a short cycle of corruption is, well, first there is an expose. There's an
Right.
uncovering of something, and then it gets exposed. But then the expose doesn't lead much further to say any serious investigation, and so then yeah, the whole thing is sort of cut short, and that's the end of this
Yeah.
cycle. So it's a short cycle, basically. Okay. But many other corruption scandals go through a process of what I say cycles of corruption. Some of these cycles would be quite long, meaning that there are
Right.
quite a number of stages that they go through. Others would be sort of go into the middle. So something like this, for example, you go at first, everything is normal.
Right.
Okay, maybe we can shift to the other one, the other, yeah, the other
Yeah, I'm trying to bring that out,
infographic.
but
Okay,
I
yeah, this one. Okay, so
okay.
here, the you start off with everything is normal. Okay, so some officials, or many officials would be not involved, of course, in corruption, but then there would be some, but this is not unknown. This corruption is sort of hidden to the general
Yeah.
public. And so it's like nothing is seen. So that's why I was referring to it as a linear
Right.
corruption. Okay. But then when a certain case gets to be exposed, then then it goes through a cycle, okay? And first, it could be the first part would be uncovering and or expose, and
Right.
then the second is investigation.
Right.
If somebody gets indicted, okay, then you go to the third, which is indictment and prosecution.
Right.
From prosecution, you proceed to punishment or acquittal. But people think that, a lot of people think that after punishment or acquittal, that's the end of it, okay? But then sometimes it moves on to, well, the sentence or the punishment is not implemented, or it could be reversed, or there is a pardon given by, say, the president to the one who has been convicted, okay? So that's uh, uh, stage number five. Okay. Again, it doesn't necessarily end at stage number five. Okay. It could go further. And this is something which is sort of, uh, uh, yeah, a bit unusual in the sense that the many of those tainted officials try to rehabilitate themselves to be able to gain, a certain degree of public acceptability, respectability, and legitimacy. Okay, gain back to some extent the public trust, and then after this rehabilitation and legitimation process, which could mean, say, running for office or getting appointed to a government position, then it goes back to normal. It's the end of the cycle. But the end of the cycle doesn't necessarily mean that the corruption has stopped. Okay, it could mean, well, some of those have been indicted, accused, etc., may not have been guilty at all. Okay, and so they just go back to honest public service. But then there are others, the really incorrigible ones, who are corrupt, and they just get back into the game. Okay. And so you have this long cycle of corruption where the big fish can get away and they get back into the game. Okay. Now, the objective here of the big fish is that to try to get away at the soonest possible time, at the earliest stage, one or two or three or four. Okay. Uh, but then when they sort of are able to escape, okay, then they get back into the game. Okay. Now, these stages that I enumerated here are not necessarily, you don't have to go through all these processes. So, for example, some would sort of, after indictment, after acquittal, then that's it. So they go back to normal, okay? Not necessarily passing to 1.5 or 1.6. Why am I using 1.1, 1.2, 1.3? Because when the 1.1, 1.2 is finished and then it goes to 1.7, okay, you can also say that that is 2.0 because it could also mean the beginning again, okay? that some people may be engaging again in corruption, and then you get to 2.1, there is again an uncovering or an expose. Okay, and so that's 2.1. Okay, so for example, in the case of Jingoy Estrada, he was already involved in or he was implicated and indicted, but found not guilty in Wettingate, okay, in which his father was convicted of plunder. And then he got implicated again in PDAF. Okay, so that's 2.1. Okay, and then he got implicated again in the flood control scam. Okay, so now he's on the verge of getting into 3.3 because right now he's being investigated. That's 3.2. Okay, and he could get into 3.3. So yeah, that's how it goes. Okay, one corruption cycle could lead to another corruption cycle.
At the risk of making sure no one gets totally depressed. I mean, if I were a corrupt politician, I look at this, I say, there is hope. Safe ka. Safe ka ulit, Jingoy. I
I
mean,
will get to that. I mean, okay, we can discuss that later.
like
But I'm just trying to
safe
first
yata.
maybe
I think
explain
Jingo is
this.
safe. Yeah, after watching this. No, but on a serious note, Nathan, obviously, I don't know if you have caught it, but we also have good friends, sociologist Marco Garrido in University of Chicago, also had this new piece, 1,000 years of corruption in the Philippines. We had a very extensive discussion with
Yeah.
ako naman, I call it 100 years of war on corruption dahil Marco
Mm.
Garrido had this very fantastic new journal article. Kung tinignan niya lahat ng corruption scandals since Rojas administration, right? If not all the way to
Okay.
Commonwealth, ang daming corruption. Nevertheless, the argument that Marco Garrido and some other folks would make is umiiba yung kumbaga the nature, the gravity, the magnitude, and also the responses of society to this kind of corruption. So while it's cyclical, there's also kind of a mutation and evolution. Kumbaga parang COVID-19, parang ano yun parang virus yan, nag-mutate siya.
Mm.
Ang gusto ko maintindihan dito, Professor Quimpo, is what is your understanding of this latest corruption scandal? Because numbers palang, it's way bigger than the last major one, which was the Napole scandal. And to be honest, this latest corruption scandal is not just a Marcos Jr. era scandal. This is really a decade of corruption, right? We're looking at both Marcos and Duterte administration. Is there some
Decades.
no, but itong latest, 'di ba? Kasi alam natin
Okay.
Vizcaya projects sa PCIJ
Yeah,
2016-17
yeah,
talaga
yeah.
nagsimula yung mga ganitong malawakan na billion na flood control. We know that there were all sorts of mumbo jumbo Mickey Mouse ghost projects before, pero ito mukhang this is a decade-long specialized next level hyper corruption. What is your read of this? Kasi when you say cycle, it gives an impression na we're just going through the same motions, right? Or
Mhm.
variation on a theme. But many would say this is the worst ever corruption scandal in Philippine history, or there was something very special in the past decade that may have contributed to this. What is your read, Professor Quimpo? Because you taught a whole course on this, apparently. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the things are really getting worse. And there are certain aspects of Philippine politics which are really sort of becoming, yeah, in a way, it's worse. Huh? Before, you would just sort of look at things like in terms of, say, a battle of different politicians, okay? And the groups and factions of the different politicians. But now things have become much more, how do you call it now? Stark, okay? Or more
Karapalan?
clear cut in the sense that now you see the different traditional politicians gravitating towards political dynasties, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and then if you look into, say, vote buying, back in year 2001, when I was still doing research on contested democracy, okay, oh, the rates of, vote buying were just, say, 50 pesos to 200 pesos, okay? But now, when in the last elections, 2022, I heard of stories that, it's now getting into five figures, okay, 15,000, Now, because different politicians sort of pool their resources together, and the ones who are in the same sample ballot, for example, and so the figures go as high as 15,000. So there are really in so many ways things are sort of getting worse. Okay, and
But why?
precisely
But why,
because
Nathan? Nathan, why do you think it's getting worse? Is there something particularly parang lumala ba yung impunity sa ating sistema at sa
yes,
ano yung
definitely.
dahilan na lumala itong impunity? But I could also add another aspect. Yumaman din ang Pilipinas. I mean, in a sense that if you look at the budget of the government of the Philippines, I remember working sa Kongreso in the early 2010s. Kumpara sa 2009, 2010, I think our national budget now is like 4 or 5 times larger. I mean, there's so much more money also in the coffers of government right now. So why? So I just, in a way, I kind of answered it. But in your opinion, bakit
Well,
they,
the thing is, it's this. No? I mean, when it comes to say, just look at economic development, for example. Okay, now definitely in terms of say, if you just sort of measure things in terms of GDP, GDP per capita, and so forth. Okay, then the Philippines is in fact sort of moving from lower middle income. I think it's sort of getting to the boundary already of uh
$16? We missed it
yeah
by $16, I think.
but I mean the thing is that in terms of it's getting to be either middle or something like that,
Upper
okay,
middle
in
income, yeah.
terms of GDP per capita, okay. And the thing is that so in a sense the Philippines is growing uh economically, but very, very slowly. The problem there is that it's being overtaken by other countries in Southeast Asia, which are growing much faster. Okay, so it's not exactly truly a sick man of Asia as it was sort of being regarded before, but in terms of the rate of growth, okay, and also of human development, okay, it's sort of, lagging behind when it comes to, moving forward. And pretty soon, we've already been overtaken
By Vietnam.
by the likes of, Vietnam. And pretty soon, I think Laos might even sort of, overtake the Philippines. Okay. And so it'll be number eight or so when it was before number 4 or 5 in Southeast Asia. So that's the situation. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of, um, if you're sort of getting left behind precisely because of all the corruption and all the uh, the problems the problems that the country is facing. Anyway, definitely.
Nathan, you sound very Ateneo School of Government. I mean, to be honest, I slightly disagree with you because if you look at the numbers, actually, the Philippines and Vietnam are the two fastest growing. And along in India, we're fast. I think in terms of speed, we're not doing too bad. I think it's just really
Mhm.
neck and neck, Philippines and Vietnam. If in terms of quality, absolutely, I agree with you. It's a low quality growth driven by low end services, BPI, speculative industries like real estate. I agree with. I think speed wise, we're not doing too bad. We just missed upper middle income by $16 or so. What I was saying there is not that ang ganda ng buhay ng lahat ng tao. Ang sinasabi ko lang is that because of that relatively fast economic growth of 5-6% over the past decade, with the exception of the pandemic era, lumobo yung fiscal space ng gobyerno. So there's just
Mhm.
so much more money at the expense at the disposal of politicians, which for me partly explain this. But Nathan, what I want to also understand is bakit sa tingin.
Wait, let's interrupt there because you were saying
Sure,
about
please go
in
ahead.
terms of the rapid growth now, okay? But what I was trying to point out actually was the rate of growth of the Philippines in comparison with other its neighbors going back to say the 1960s and to
Oh,
the
absolutely, I agree with you.
1970s,
Oh,
okay?
100%.
Because I mean, the Philippines was sort of being rated as number two or number three in Asia after Japan. And now, it's number 6, 7, 8 already in the ASEAN.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree with you. Now, and I think we can easily see from longitudinal analysis. starting mid 1960s talaga. I think that was really the beginning of the end for the Philippines as one of the star economies of the region. I agree with you, but I'm saying that
Mm,
in fairness though, in the past 10, 15 years, we're back again as one of the
okay.
fastest growing, but already behind na tayo, right? So
Mm,
no, but I was just trying to explain bakit lumobo yung fiscal space ng gobyerno, but ang daming pera. Because tax collection has increased, the rate of tax collection has also increased, tax effort has also slightly improved or recovered
mm.
over the past 10, 15 years. So I just want to get those facts on the table. But having said that, Professor Kimpo, bakit sa tingin mo ganyan kagarapalan yung level of corruption in the past decade when ironically, at least on the paper, the Philippines went from 2,000 per capita income to almost 5,000 now. So actually our GDP per capita almost doubled. Our middle class is much larger than ever. I think by some estimate, we have 30, 35 million people who could belong to at least a Goldman Sachs definition of what is the middle class. So what again, you may disagree with those facts, but that's
No,
the
no,
numbers.
no, no,
Those are the
I
numbers I'm
agree.
looking at. Yeah. But but
Eh,
but but my point is that bakit ganong kagarapalan yung corruption nangyari? Bakit ganon? $10 billion almost
mm.
yung
Yeah.
ninakaw over the past decade. That's a lot. $10 billion.
Yeah, yeah. So I would attribute that to, well, one of the important things to consider is the weak institutions, okay? Particularly when it comes to politics and the nature of patronage politics that we find ourselves in, and also the extent to which rent seeking, rent creation, and rent extraction is going on. I mean, there have not been enough checks to that have been put in place, to really sort of, yeah, you have a terrible political party system. I don't even know if you can really call them political parties. So with all these problems, especially when it comes to the political setup, then I guess, yeah, you could expect that the problems such as corruption and plunder will get worse. Okay.
Yun nga, Nathan, again, where I'm trying to confirm is that if I mean your works are classics, right? If I read your work from 1990s, 2000s, 1980s, you were still warning about bossism, patrimonial state, dynasties. So what I want to understand is we always had weak institutions. We always had these dynasties. Cacique democracy of Benedict Anderson goes back to the 7 Years' War, right? The panahon pa ni Frederick the Great. So bakit ngayon lumobo ito? That's what I'm trying to understand. I think the puzzle for me, although I have my own preliminary hypothesis on that, is that bakit ganyang kataas yung level ng corruption? Bakit ganyang kagarapalan? That's what I want to understand. Bakit yung flood control ganong kagrabe?
Yeah. I know there are no checks basically. And well, the thing also there is that if you go back to the discussion, actually when you talk about elite democracy, cacique democracy, and all that, and precisely in the book that I came up with on contested democracy, I was sort of contesting this
2008. I
particular.
mean, the date is 2008, just for people to know. This was a book in 2008. You were already warning about these things. Yeah.
Yeah. And uh, in fact, what I'm working on at the moment is uh, actually finished the first draft already about a discussion about the Philippine state. Okay, because yeah, there's so many characterizations of the Philippine state nowadays. Like you have weak state, soft state,
Anti-development
patrimonial
state.
state, anti-development state, and so forth. And I'm sort of, raising questions about all these different characterizations that have been put forward. Okay, because sometimes I think the way things are being characterized as far as the Philippine state is concerned is that they're a bit maybe too negative. Okay, maybe too negative. Okay, and even in the
Interesting. Yeah.
point
Hmm.
about corruption, that was also a point that I made in that article that came out in the business world. Okay, well, this whole idea of state capture is already has been written about uh, by quite a number of authors. But they come up within a framework of such things as weak state, soft state, okay, that's a bueva. And then you have patrimonial oligarchy state, that is Hachkov, okay. Well, then comes up with anti-development state, okay. But then one of the things that has also come out in all these discussions about the state is the idea of state capture, okay, which actually comes from the corruption studies field. Okay, they come up with this whole idea of
Para
state
siyang
capture.
regulatory captured except it's at the macro scale.
It's basically sort of oligarchic or elite capture of the state. Okay, but this sort of thinking emerged from corruption studies. Okay, and it has even reached a point now that where the people in corruption studies have come up with this state capture index, okay, in which the Philippines was around, well, about 60%, something like that, in the fourth out of six category, okay, and sort of uh, there is a certain degree of state capture, but not as bad as, say, for example, state capture in the likes of, Russia, for example, okay, and where, authoritarianism prevents you from challenging anything, okay? So the Philippines still has that space within which to, voice dissent and possibly sort of change things. Okay, and that's why I was sort of, thinking that it's not as bad as, say, sometimes the way the Philippines is being portrayed. Okay, and there's
Absolutely.
still actually some
Can
hope.
I show this? Because this is perfect. I love this discussion. This is really good. Can you see this? 1 second lang. I'm trying to. This is the World Bank study on state capture. You can see the Philippines is not exceptionally bad.
Yeah,
Can you see that? Is it
yeah,
showing
yeah,
on
yeah.
your side? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Weirdly, on my side, it doesn't show, but you can clearly see in that graph, diba, na, Philippines is kind of there, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
can see
Okay,
Philippines
yeah. That's
exactly in the
precisely that.
middle.
Okay.
Yeah, we're next
Hmm.
to Serbia,
Yeah.
Indonesia, Brazil. Thailand is a bit above us. Colombia right behind us. So we're nowhere close to, like, you can see Syria is at the worst level in terms of extent of corruption. And then of course Denmark and Finland are at the least corrupt, right? We're almost exactly in the middle, no? This is
Hmm.
exactly what
Yeah.
I've been saying. So we're really
Yeah.
not as bad as people say, but we're also not doing well. So this is
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
the point. We
And it's
exceptionalize the
still quite a
Philippines.
drag to
Absolutely.
development and human development. Yeah, in the
But thank you.
Philippines.
This is fantastic. This is exactly my point. That we're exactly somewhere in the middle. Usually I use the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, but this is even better. The state capture and extent of traditional corruption index. This is a World Bank study I'm posting right now. Sorry, Nathan, I'm getting excited
Hmm.
because this is really good stuff. Thank you. I have new data again. Thanks to you.
That the thing there is that one of the things that I was sort of um, uh, reacting to actually was when people uh, uh, describe the Philippines as, say, for example, a weak state, okay, or a soft state, or a patrimonial oligarchic state, it seems that there is no gradation, okay? It's all negative, okay? So sometimes, when people talk about the Philippines as being a weak state, so all those weak institutions are listed down, and there's nothing positive, okay? Now, I don't think it's that bad, okay? And that is precisely one of the points that I'm raising in this uh, new book that I'm trying to finish. Mm.
Wow. Again, thank you so much, Nathan. Now, the more I look forward to your book, I'm sure it's going to be a classic, just like your previous book. pag-usapan natin later on a little bit the left, no? The Philippine political left, because I think that's
Okay.
something I want to ask you. We just had Walden a few days ago, and we're gonna soon have Walden and Ronald Llamas to discuss the Philippine left, because I think there's a historic opportunity for the real opposition to shape the direction of things. But Professor Kimba, I think for the purpose of people who are just joining us right now, are curious about ano bang pinagsasabi natin. I mean, it looks like your book will be reflecting a series of, you have been very prolific over the past few months. I'm looking at your articles just on Rappler. Ang dami mong nasulat pala about corruption issues. So starting in July 30, you had this piece, Danger Signs in Oligarchy, Corruption. Then you had pork barrel fraud control scams of patronage and rent seeking, November. And then over the past month, you have been on Blitzkrieg, the politics of rehabilitation, legitimization, and the cycles of corruption and major corruption scandals and cases from 1989. So this is for purpose of people who want to understand gaano kalawak at lalim yung analysis one, Nathan. And I'm so thankful there are people like you out there providing nuance and also details. So, Professor Kimpo, going back to this again, what is your worry right now? Because in the coming days, weeks, at most months, although I don't think abot yan ng months given the political pressure. Secretary Remulla is expected to come with that list of yung mga big fish na kakasuhan. And when we say big fish, we refer to the senators and congressmen and big people who have been implicated in this ghost project, flood control project. Can you tell me, Professor Kimpo, what are your expectations? What are your worries? And what should happen so that the list is not Mickey Mouse list, to put it mildly?
Okay. So the thing is, precisely that's what I was writing about in Cycles of Corruption, that, the big fish getting away. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, people can sort of, some of those big fish, okay, will try to get away at the soonest possible time. So, for example, now, the investigation phase is about to be finished, and you now go into the next phase, which is the indictment, okay? Indictment and prosecution. So what's interesting there is that who's going to get indicted, okay? Okay. Will all those big fish, okay, be indicted, really indicted, okay? And again, also, the question is, uh, will they be indicted for plunder or for lesser crimes? Okay, so those are things that you could sort of look into. Okay, at this particular phase. Another thing that you have to watch out for is the independence and integrity of the ombudsman. Will he be able to sort of, indict people who are in the Marcos camp? People who are very much identified with Marcos, okay, especially, for example, Martin Romualdez, okay, who has been sort of, his name has been mentioned in all these things now. And is the investigation sort of, um, well, Jonas Kwa, the expert, Asian expert on corruption, was talking about, anti-corruption agencies, which turned out to be paper tigers, okay, because they're not really able to do much. Uh, but then the other thing also that's worrisome is that some of these anti-corruption agencies in certain countries have been turned into attack dogs, meaning that the
Weaponized.
administration sort of uses them to attack the opposition, or those are, in the rival camp. Okay, so those are things that you have to sort of worry about. Okay, and you have to really maintain the vigilance and being active at being scrutinizing things. Okay, but then another thing that you have to consider quite well is that um, what's this? That the investigations, the whole process of, say, from beginning up till the very end of, say, a case, a corruption scandal case, uh, takes about average 10 years. That's according to Ombudsman Marcelo. He was quoted on that. He says it takes 10 years. In other words, okay, the decisions will not come during Remulia's time. The decisions regarding those cases, okay, it will come in the next, or possibly even the uh, the 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 uh, uh, the ombudsman even after uh, Martires, after Remulia,
Remulia. Yeah.
okay,
4 years
and
after him. Yeah.
what I was also trying to point out in another article, which I don't know if it'll come out, is that, the way that the ombudsman's office has been behaving, it's like a seesaw. Sometimes you're really good ombudsman, and then they're followed by uh, ombudsmen who do not perform very well. Okay, so if after, say, for example, you had Carpio Morales, you had
Conchita
Martires,
Martires.
okay, okay, who even is even admitting that corruption grew in every agency in the government during his time. I mean, uh, anyway. So the thing is that if Remulla does good, but then the question is, what happens with the next? Will it be another Martinez, for example? If he's like going to be like Carpio Morales, but the next one is going to be. So what happened? For example, in the case of Carpio Morales, okay, so there was three senators, at least, who were, charged with plunder, okay, during Carpio Morales' time in connection with PIDAF, okay? And then several others, there were also, in the PIDAF case, also with plunder. During the time of Martinez, of course, you have the likes of, Napoles, convicted of plunder, okay? But no other major political official was convicted of plunder during Martires' time. Okay, the only public official whom I know of who was convicted of plunder was none other than Cambe, no, the staff, okay, the chief of staff of Bong Revilla. Okay, Bong Revilla himself, who was supposed to be the guy who received the biggest kickback from PDAF, okay, was absolved. He was the charges were dismissed. While his
Did he keep the money? I mean,
I don't know what no,
there
but
was
the
some
thing is
credit.
that
Like, parang, ewan ko kung
Cambe
anong ginawa niya
Cambe
kasi yung
was
pera
the
nasa,
only other
yeah.
person convicted of plunder. And the sad thing about it was that in 1921, Cambe died in prison. So, no, I mean, I think Cambe was a fall guy. I mean, with
Yeah.
all this, the biggest scandal up until that time involving the Congress, so many legislators, I counted at least 27 who were indicted for plunder or corruption. Okay? And not a single one of those major figures was ever convicted of plunder. There were about maybe 8 or so who were convicted of lesser crimes, corruption or bribery or things of the sort. Okay, so that's the thing, that things could go well with, with Remulla at this time, okay? But what happens after he's gone? Because the case is going to proceed for 10 years, okay, on the average. And that's the assessment of Ombudsman Marcelo. It will take 10 years for a case to be finished.
Which was just empirically reinforced because the past 12 to 15 months were a winning streak for all sorts of shady people sa Sandigan Bayan. People forget that yung korte is
Yeah,
the Sandigan Bayan. Ombudsman is the prosecutorial office to ensure accountability. Enrile, Be Nice,
yeah.
Marcos Cronis,
Mm.
Napoles, winning streak. Lahat sila na acquit last year. Grabe. I mean, what the heck is going on? Do people even know what's the Sandigan Bayan? Is anyone watching Sandigan Bayan? How is it even determined sinong nasa Sandigan Bayan? Who appoints them? Who guards the guardians, kumbaga?
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, So yeah, anyway, there's that article that I was working that I already submitted, but I don't know if it will be published on the CISO of the ombudsman. Because first you have a good ombudsman, but then the next one sort of is not so yeah doesn't really you cannot sort of consider him or her to be having integrity or independence. Okay, and then you come up with cases like, for example, uh Lito Lapid. Lito Lapid was implicated in the 2004 fertilizer fund scam. Okay, so he was investigated during the time of uh, Gutierrez, Ombudsman Gutierrez. And then he was charged during the time of Carpio Morales. Then he was found, supposedly the charges were dismissed during the time of Martinez, but then a few years later, the uh, Supreme Court decided to revive the case in 2019. Okay, so there you have it. Okay, 2004 was um, the time when the fertilizer fund scam occurred. Okay, and so here you have former representative and former governor Lito Lapid going through four different ombudsmen: Gutierrez, Carpio Morales, Martirez, and Remulla. And the case is not finished yet, up to now. In the meantime, he has won several times as senator. He ran again, before that he was governor, and then he ran after the whole thing. In 2019, he ran for senator. And he was reelected in 2025. Okay? And that's what I call rehabilitation and relegitimization. Okay? So those are,
No, absolutely, absolutely. Obviously, nothing beats the Marcoses when it comes. They're still the gold
well, yeah.
standard. Yeah, there. I don't
Well,
think
yeah,
there are
yeah,
many
yeah.
people who can beat the Marcoses. I'll tell you one thing, Nathan. Remember when the Rajapaksas were kicked out of Sri Lanka the other year,
Yeah.
and then someone was interviewed on BBC, and was asked about, okay, saan ang mga Rajapaksa? There were suspicions they're in Hong Kong or Japan or whatever. And then someone said, yeah, who knows? Maybe after a few years, they're going to come back, just like the Marcoses in the Philippines. Like we're now like a role model for
Yeah,
so that's how bad it is. But then again, going back to this, Nathan, I want to ask this another question before I go to the big picture one on the political left and also lessons from Japan, because
yeah.
Ronald was there in Japan with some of our good friends, talking about the real flood controls. But we know that Japan at some point was also feudalistic, very corrupt, brutal country. I am a
Yeah.
big fan of Japanese history, like the whether basically the pre consolidation era, pre 1600 periods and all of that. But before we go there, because I think that's many people would love to hear your point of view, Nathan, given your base in Japan as an academic. Um, we had there are two cases I want to talk about, and so these are cases whereby medyo matino yung gobyerno at nagkaroon ng corruption scandal and yet things actually got out of control or even worse. So one is, think about the case of Operation Car Wash in Brazil. Remember? This is when the PT was in power, when Lula's designated successor was in power. I think I lost you for a second. So Nathan, I was
Okay.
talking about the two corruption scandal cases. Sorry, two relatively decent governments who were in charge when corruption scandals broke out. One is the Operation Car Wash, I can remember in Brazil, right? In early 2010s. And then almost kasabay din niya yung Napoles corruption scandal. In both cases, Nathan, it looks like things went really south, so much south that in the case of Brazil, almost everyone was taken out, including Rousseff, the first female, very progressive president in Brazil, until Bolsonaro came up. In the Philippines, it completely discredited Dan Matuid and Aquino because in the end, Aquino himself was not living up to the expectations of good governance when a lot of his own key cabinet members came under scrutiny and question. And then that paved the way for Duterte. So we have two cases, very interesting cases, in early 2010s to meet the Brazil under Rousseff, PT progressive, Philippines under Aquino, reformist, kind of okay. Both, there was corruption scandal. They tried to respond to it. In the end, both kind of went down. One Bolsonaro, one Duterte. What is your read of that? What went wrong there? What are the lessons there in terms of
Well,
fight
the
corruption?
thing there, one of the, that was, I actually wrote an article on that about fighting corruption through patronage. Okay, because what happened actually was that uh, Noynoy Aquino was really sort of trying to go against corruption. Okay, and he was really sort of going after key figures of corruption in the Philippines, whom he believed to be key figures. Okay, and so you have Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, Corona, the Chief Justice, and Merceditas Gutierrez. Okay, he went after all of them. Okay, and Gutierrez resigned. Corona was removed. He was impeached and then found guilty in a trial. And then, yeah, but he failed in the case of pushing against Arroyo. Okay, and yeah, so he was trying to push for
Whose
this
lawyer was a
anti-corruption.
certain Clooney, right? A certain
So
people
yeah, that's
forget
true.
that a certain
Yeah,
Clooney was
yeah.
actually lawyer
Yeah,
for Arroyo. I
yeah,
never
that's
forgot
true.
that. I
That's the
never forgot that.
Amal Clooney. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, the thing was that I was sort of following what was happening, and what the Noynoy Aquino government was doing was that it was trying to get the support of the different congressmen and senators for his anti-corruption campaign. And what was the sort of the uh, incentive, okay, to be able to get them to vote for the like impeachment of, say, for example, Corona and all that? It was through this, uh, um, pork barrel, okay? And one result, although of course, PDAF preceded Noynoy. I mean, it was already going on even before his time, but he continued with it. Okay, and even when PDAF was already declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, s- Noynoy was still quite reluctant to sort of resort to the so-called presidential pork. Okay, that was the term that was being used then. Okay, and in fact, in after Noy was had finished his term, Javier Morales actually sort of indicted Aquino precisely because he was supposed to be usurping legislative powers, okay, through all this uh, presidential pork type of arrangements that he had gotten himself into, okay. And so in a way, that's why what I call it was fighting corruption to patronage, okay, which in the end was not too successful. Okay, and in a way also set things up for what happened during the Duterte period. Hmm.
Before we go to Japan's brutal history, people forget.
I-
Everyone
oh, you
thinks
just
Japan
read
was
about all these roads to the concrete roads that are built all over Japan. That was during the time of patronage politics was really
exactly
at its
like
height.
people think Japan was like it was just created out of heaven with Hello Kitty and
And
anime. People
then-
have no idea. I mean, we can go to the Zaibatsus and we can go to like pre Tokugawa era. Actually, even immediate post Tokugawa era, the Restoration period. I mean, ang daming kalokohan nangyari sa Japan. People always conveniently forget that. But before we go to Japan, let's talk about. I mean, I just want to get a preliminary answer on that because had we had Ronald Llamas with us now, alam mo naman sasabihin ni Ronald Llamas, parang ganito, umupo ka sa isang room, like let's say 8 out of 10 people are corrupt. How do you fight corruption? Because if you go after the 8 people, they're gonna kill you. Uunahin ka nila, di ba? So, realistically, in a super corrupt, systemic corrupt system, how can you fight corruption without also playing the game? Because otherwise, your other
Yeah,
option
yeah,
is either
precisely.
go
Yeah, yeah,
Chavez,
okay.
go
So, yeah.
dictator, I mean,
So, yeah, the question is how exactly are you going to go about it? Yeah. And then, for example, now, I mean, some people are pushing for, abolition or banning of political dynasties. And for Congress to pass a law on banning political dynasties, well, 70, 80% of the people in Congress or in the House of Representatives belong to political dynasties. Yeah.
yeah, that's my point. I mean, people forget during Pinoy, which was the height of quote unquote reformism, 8 out of 10 offices in the Congress and legislature were occupied by dynasties. Even worse, right? According to the World Bank, 40 richest families took home 76% of newly created growth. This is the lack of inclusiveness I was warning. So I said I disagree that Philippines is not growing fast. I think it's growing fast enough, but it's the fact that all of that, much of that growth goes to only 40 families. Ganyan ka oligarchic yung ating system.
Mhm.
But having said that, Nathan, before people give up on the Philippines, sasabihin, ayan na, mag-migrate na naman tayo. Yan ang problema, Nathan. People watch us and they say, mag-migrate na lang tayo. Before people give up on our country, Nathan, because a lot of our audience are actually Pinoys abroad, in Europe, in US, na gusto nila bumalik, may pagmamahal sa bayan. Let's give them real hope, not false hope. What does the history of Japan tell us about fighting corruption or the relationship between corruption and development? Not to mention corruption, development, and democracy. Because Japan, since the Second World War's end, has been a nominally democratic nation. We can debate about the LDP hegemony and all of that, but it's a nominally democratic country. And yet, it's now seen as a paragon of relative good governance. It's a highly industrialized country. In many ways, it's still a gold standard in research and development on so many areas. Although, of course, Korea and China have been knocking on the door. Mahabang usapan yan. Nathan, can you remind people how did Japan become the Japan of today? Did Hello
Well,
Kitty
yeah, I
or
mean, it takes a
Samurai
process
X
of
come and solve it?
building, consolidating good institutions, okay? But yeah, I mean, there still are quite a number of corruption cases that come up, but it's not as bad as, say, for example, 50 years ago, okay? And well, if we go down to the Philippines, I mean, the thing with this, I mean, even if there have been times before when you were pushing for change, and then something happens, and then it's a setback. Um, it so happened. I mean, of course, given my activist background, being involved before in the underground and all that, and before I was talking about, I was already predicting that something like an uprising was going to happen in 1986. Okay, and it did. Um, well, the thing is that again, the way things are developing is that there are again openings, possibilities, opportunities. Okay, and the thing here is that well, let me sort of go back to a point that our good friend Walden has been saying in together with his uh, colleagues in the anti-development state theory. Okay, he has been saying that the whole issue of corruption, okay, has just served as some sort of a tool of one faction of the elite in bringing down or toppling another faction. Okay, and in a way, you could say that that is true. Okay, you already had two popular uprisings. Okay, EDSA one, EDSA two, in which the target was a corrupt president. In the first case, it was a corrupt dictator. Okay, and yeah, the dictatorships, the corrupt presidents were toppled, but then eventually it was still again the elite that came back to power, and corruption came back. Okay, and according to a survey of Pulse Asia uh, back in 2007, the replacement of Estrada okay, Arroyo was even worse than Estrada. She was being considered then as the most corrupt president the Philippines ever had. Okay, now, but as I was mentioning, as I mentioned to you earlier, the rivalry, the competition, the struggle among the elite today has sort of become much more striking, more clear cut. Okay, uh, in that the it has sort of gravitated towards, this political dynasties. Okay, you did have that before. You had political clans, or as McCoy would say it, anarchy of families. But now it's in the nature now of political dynasties. To the extent, for example, that you have when somebody who is a non-dynasty politician wins, the first thing that he's going to do after he wins is to set up his own political dynasty. Okay, and as the former senator, the late Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, what is unique about the Philippines, what she says is that what's unique about the Philippines is that it is now the capital of political dynasties in the world. Okay, so uh, so now you really have it where you have uh, starkly it's dynasties. Okay, and the way that, say, the battle for 2028, the way it's shaping up, is that it's going to be a battle mainly between a group of dynasties that sort of are around the Marcos dynasty, and then the other would be in the Duterte dynasty. Okay, and apparently, what could come out from this Marcos camp? One possibility they say is, yeah, what's this? John Vic, okay, Remulla, okay, and on the other, of course, is Sara. A lot of things can still happen in 2028. But I think that precisely because of the outrage against, the corruption, okay, the biggest corruption scandal in Philippine history, there is now the possibility for a third force to arise, okay, and uh, it sh- hopefully it would be able to come up with a challenge much stronger than, say, Lenny Robredo's in 2022.
And
And
much
I'm
earlier
quite,
organized, not like
yeah,
not two
that
days
too.
before
Yeah,
candidacy
yeah, yeah,
filing.
yeah. So yeah, that's why I'm quite optimistic, in fact, okay, that there are possibilities. Okay. Um, People were asking me again, will it not be through, won't it be necessary to have another uprising? And I said, for as long as a third force is not yet that strong, then another uprising like EDSA 1, EDSA 2 could just end up being, yeah,
Hijacked
coming
again.
up with the same thing,
Yeah,
okay,
or
with the
get
same
hijacked.
results.
Or get
Yeah,
hijacked.
to get
It,
hijacked. Yeah,
yeah, it will
anyway,
be
that's
hijacked.
that's the thing. Okay, so that's why I mean I'm quite optimistic about the possibilities for the Philippines in the coming years. But yeah, the forces that are anti-Trapo, anti-dynasty, anti-corruption will really have to, get their act together and forge a strong unity before 2028.
So this is the last part of our discussion, Nathan. I'm sorry. It must be very late also there in Japan. My apologies. We started late, but I'm very impressed by your level of energy. I mean, knock on the wood.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, I mean, as I said before, I said earlier, you have high hopes for certain changes to occur, okay, and then there's a setback, okay, but then things develop again in such a way that new opportunities arise, and the problem is really just how to seize the opportunity, okay, seize the day.
Absolutely. And here, I want you to be a bit more Ronald Llamas than Walden. Because kanina kasi we were doing a lot of framework analysis, a lot of big picture analysis, which I really love. But what I want to ask Nathan is, okay, how can the third force come together? Who are the potential core elements of the third force? And most importantly, ano yung magiging organizing principle ng third force na yan?
Mm. Yeah, well, it will have to sort of gather reform forces within government, okay? Uh, Reform forces within civil society, okay? It will be necessary, I think, that some form of coalition, even with traditional political forces, even with certain dynasties, might be necessary. Political dynasties may be necessary. Okay, but the objective basically is to come up with a progressive and democratic agenda. Okay, that is sort of strongly for against corruption and for integrity.
So anong mga models or best examples you can think of? I mean, I always look at Latin America as our closest political cousins, given the concentration of power, economic and political power, given our Hispanic Latin American, Spanish colonial political economy legacy. But from Asia, from other countries, I mean, obviously you were trained in ANU and also in Europe, etc. But anong pag-intindi mo, Nathan? Anong mga lessons? What are the best practices that the third forces can draw on as an inspiration moving forward?
Maraming mga cases dyan sa Latin America, as you yourself said, because of, yung experience nila with electoral politics, with electoral democracy, na hindi ganun kalalim kung ikumpara mo with, say, yung experience ng Asia. Okay? Because maraming cases sa Asia na talagang authoritarianism talaga yung namuno, okay? And so, and there are a lot of cases in Latin America where, yung mga reform-oriented forces sort of forged alliances uh, na even with forces within the well, right-wing forces, for example, na hindi naman yung ultra-right, okay? Dahil nga, yeah, the idea there is within the oligarchic elite, for example, of Latin America or Latin American countries, you could actually take advantage also of the splits, okay, within their ranks, okay,
Play them against
and
each other. Play
mm,
the right wing, the reactionary forces against each other.
Yeah, precisely. And that's yun yung challenge ngayon. Kasi you will have to sort of forge certain alliances even with, dynastic forces. Kasi nga, as you have said, 70% ng Kongreso nasa hawak ng mga political dynasties. Hmm.
I mean, alangan you work with the air or with the
Yeah,
sky,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
or alangan naman firing
Hmm.
squad mo lahat mga yan. I mean, kasi
Hmm.
Nathan, I mean to be honest, we are both progressive lefts. I mean, there are some people who are looking for a Bolshevist kind of parang kind of October. No, but I was saying, as you correctly pointed out, as Ron has pointed out, nako po, if there's a coup d'etat or something crazy happens, either Duterte's will take over or something worse, right? I mean, we're not ready yet. We're not in a position na sasaluhin natin yung sistema. I mean, we just have to be honest about the balance of forces here. I mean, Nathan, one of the thinkers that keeps on popping up in our conversation in the past year or so with other guests is Antonio Gramsci. He talks about war of position, war of maneuver. Are you of the belief that we should be steering the war of position kind of stage kung saan binibuild pa natin yung political capital, mass mobilization, winning over the hearts and minds of people? I mean, is that your understanding of what we should do?
Well, yeah, yeah, kasama yon. But I think there also has to be active engagement talaga, even in electoral politics. Alam mo, may namamayani dyan yung patronage politics. nariyan yung vote buying. So it's not, uh, yeah, kasama yung Gramscian war opposition dyan, yung hegemony, etc. But you also have to deal with the actual politics on the ground, okay, and that you'll have to sort of, in a way, play with some of these uh, dynastic players. Hmm.
And how can we do that without undermining our core convictions or undermining prospects for long-term political transformation?
Yeah, yeah, the thing is that dapat principle pa rin yung pag-engage, okay? So you yourself do not engage in patronage politics, but you may have to sort of come up with alliances with forces that have traditionally been doing this, okay? Or even, yeah, uh, people who have been yeah, people you have not been working with closely before. You may have to sort of, open up. Like, yeah, right now, I mean, I don't know the Tulfos, for example, but what are the prospects there? No, I haven't really done much research on
Well,
them.
Rafi is number two in all the surveys.
Yeah.
He was even number one at some point, but mukhang he's not ready
Mm.
yet. Or I don't know, maybe nagpapa-cute pa lang siya. But as Ronald, mas kausap ni Ronald si
Yeah,
Rafi.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
I know.
Nathan,
Yeah.
you're good. See, I told you you're natural for podcasting. I mean, of course, looking forward to your book. I'm so glad you're doing essay and all. But Professor Kimbo, we want to have you more on podcasts like this because it really forces us to think, right? And ako, I really appreciated our conversation today, especially on the state capture, because state capture is different from corruption, right? State capture is a situation whereby the elite or their proxies shape the very rules of the game. They rig the game itself, right?
Mhm.
From within, through laws, through reforms. While corruption is just, nagnakaw ka in defiance of the law. So
Yeah,
it,
and one of the things actually that struck me when I was teaching in Ateneo and this course in corruption. So I raised the question, uh, uh, do you think that corruption is the biggest problem in the Philippines? And quite a number were saying yes. Okay. And I said, oh, is it just a manifestation of a bigger problem? Okay. But yeah, of course, it takes some time to be able to explain things. Okay.
but Nathan,
But yeah,
maybe
that's
because
why
that's
also that.
Ateneo. Because that's,
Huh?
I mean, with all due respect to our friends, I think, kaya minsan napapaisip, I don't know if you've heard also, so I mentioned Marco Garrido, but I think our good friend si Leloy from Berkeley has been even more hard-hitting on this. Why, and he's from Ateneo. I mean, baka naman itong diskurso natin about corruption, this particular way of approaching the issue of corruption, maybe this is sociologically more Ateneo middle class yellow kind of thing, right? Because honestly, if you look at the data, pagdating sa masa, right? It's much more variegated. It's much more complex. It's not very clear whether the broader masses, the D and E, or even upper D, or at least lower D and E, whether they also approach the issue of corruption this way. Ang pagbasa ko, I mean, look at it. Sino pa rin ang mga sikat? Duterte's pa rin. Yeah, you go to the north of the country, it's still the Marcos. It's like, and the majority of voters are from D and E, especially from D, right? So, baka naman we're also kind of in our own silo. I mean, obviously evil and corruption, but I'm saying like, meron bang pagka-elitista yung discourse na, is there an elitism to our way of approaching the corruption issue or our discourse around it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, in fact, one of the things that I sort of tried to raise in my class in Ateneo, okay, um, you know, uh, all these top politicians in the country, many of them or most of them come from such prestigious schools, Ateneo, UP, LaSalle, UST, etc. And then I said, but then so many of them end up corrupt, Is there something wrong with the educational system? Or what have the schools, these universities, been able to do in order to, come up with, to breed really real meant for others. Okay, so that was one of the questions that I posed.
I think UP
Anyway,
is
yeah.
I think UP is still the worst. I mean, in fairness sa Ateneo, they're much better.
Anyway, yeah. Those are the things that kaya you start questioning. Anong kulang? Anong kulang dyan? Bakit ganito ang nangyayari? Oh,
Do you think
anyway.
may pagkakulang din siguro in terms of exposure to progressive post-Marxist kind of analysis, which in my opinion is much deeper, much more systematic, and looks at not only corruption, but looks at the root causes of corruption
Mm,
and dynasties and lahat na itong mga democratic deficit problems we have.
mm, yeah. Well, all right.
Maybe Nathan, we have to have more of you, plus Ronald and Walden. In our own little ways, we're mainstreaming Gramsci. Suddenly, people know about Gramsci, concept of hegemony, right? So this is our little way of doing our own version of progressive public education. Maraming salamat, Professor Nathan Quimpo, joining us from Japan, obviously, University of Koba. Thank you, Nathan. Again, for the purpose of people who are interested in reading about your works, can you tell us about your recent essays? And also, do you have a working title for your upcoming book, which I really look forward to, and more than happy to endorse or review it if it's any.
Yeah, that's the well. This past few weeks, I've just been busy writing about corruption, and so there were, I think, how many? One, two, three, four articles which came out in Rappler, and another which came out in Business World. Okay, uh, and well, there's several articles more that are coming out. Uh, Still on corruption. But after a while, I think I should give more attention already to finishing that book on the Philippine state that I've been working on. Okay. Um, yeah, I still haven't really sort of, really settled on the title of that book on the Philippine state. But yeah, it's almost done. It's almost done.
Wow. I as a big fan of strong state, strong society. Kasi I had a recent talk in Oxford. Parang basically my running thesis was weak state, weak society, strong families, right? Or strong family, right? That's my but I absolutely agree with you. I think yung binary weak strong ganon misses the point because it's much more gradient. It's more 50 shades, right? So I look forward to your more 50 shades analysis of Philippine state capacity. Professor Kimbo, are we going to see also solutions? Are there going to be policy recommendations? I know we tend to not to do that in academic world, but I'm sure our audience would love to have some ideas. Do you have some working ideas about mga packages of solutions we could look at to deal with the cycle of corruption and also deepening our democracy? Oops, I think I kind of lost you, Professor Kim. You're still there? Yeah, just
Okay.
we just it's super last part. What
Mm.
are do you have certain package of solutions and all? I know policy recommendation is something that academics tend not to do, especially people of your caliber. But Nathan, just for people who are interested, kasi interesado din tayo sa solution, di ba? Hindi lang diagnostics eh. Is there kind of a hypothesis running theory you have in terms of how we can address cycle of corruption and democratic deficit in the Philippines? Sorry again for putting you on the spot.
Okay. Now, the thing was that because I've been thinking more in terms of more, system wide, and it's not just specifically just on corruption that I'm thinking of, and that is precisely the thing that that I'm dealing with in the book that I am coming up with. Okay, how exactly to sort of move out from that situation, which, well, quite a number of academics would see the Philippines as being in a very gloomy state, okay, weak state, soft state, etc. Okay, and yeah, I came up with some suggestions on that. Uh, I'm coming up with some suggestions on that in the book that's coming up. But yeah, I already sort of dealt with the whole thing about, where this thing on corruption, or this movement for combating corruption, will sort of, gravitate towards. Okay, and I was already pointing out to 2028. Okay, uh, and I think that from there, okay, then once we have more reform-oriented people within government, then they can start uh, building really, really good institutions. Okay, start the process, because I don't think it's going to be the work of just a single government. You really have to put reform-oriented governments one after another to be able to really come up with
Yeah.
long-lasting, uh, better institutions.
So kind of a multi-phased, movement-based,
Yeah.
real party building base, which all of us, I think this will be our projects, really, all of us
Okay.
collectively. So I'm sure, Nathan, you are a fantastic Ivory Tower thinker in your own right. All of
Oh
us.
my.
I mean,
Ako,
especially
ah.
when I'm in Oxford in the old building and all, I have this idea, oh, I'm gonna come up with a solution. But whenever I talk to you, to Walden, to Lelo, all, I realize there's so much we can learn from each other. So hopefully, Professor Kimpo, you have also taken something away from our little conversation today, and looking forward to having you more with us. Hopefully with Walden next time, and also with Ronald, either on Zoom or in person. So looking forward to that. Happy New Year, Nathan. May you have a blessed one, you and your loved ones, and looking forward to updates on your book. And if you have a manuscript or something you want to share, or review or blurb, more than happy to do my little part, Nathan. God bless. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity too. Okay.
Salamat.
Okay, bye.